Welcome to Rising Up for Justice, a special weekly series presented by Rising Up with Sonali, an independently produced, subscriber-supported program syndicated to radio stations, free speech TV, and podcast platforms. I'm SonaliKolhatkar, host and executive producer. Our nation and our world are overrun by billionaires and bigots, but they are few and we are many. On this series, exclusive to subscribers of Rising Up with Sonali and viewers of Free Speech TV, we'll hear from organizers in the movements for social justice, and we'll dig into the nuts and bolts of values, strategies, tactics, narratives, and building power. This week on Rising Up for Justice, JesseRabinowitz, Campaign and Communications Director at the National Homelessness Law Center, is my guest. He leads the Housing Not Handcuffs Campaign, bringing together local, state, and federal partners to fight against laws that make it a crime to live outside and push for housing and other proven solutions to homelessness. Previously, Jesse was a senior manager for Policy and Advocacy at Miriam's Kitchen, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit working to end long-term homelessness. Welcome to the program, Jesse.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So tell me first about what the National Homelessness Law Center's main goals are. Obviously, you center unhoused people and deal with the fact that we do have this crisis around the country. The campaign that you were working on, gives an indication of what it is you're most interested in, housing, not handcuffs, but lay it out for us what the main goals of the organization are. It is a law center, which suggests there's litigation involved.
Certainly, we use many tools in our toolbox, including litigation, policy, advocacy, communications, all to build a country where everyone has a safe place to live and nobody is forced to sleep outside. We really want a country where nobody is struggling to choose between paying rent and paying for groceries or paying for medicine, because we know that we have enough resources as a country to ensure that everybody has the housing and supports they need to thrive.
So, in looking at this crisis, it's huge. It's a large nation. We have 50 states. Each region's challenges might be different based on geography or local policies or state level policies. And of course, overlying all of that are federal policies. How do you address the goals? Where do you focus? Is it a case by case, region by region approach, or do you mostly focus on federal policy?
It's really all of the above. Right now, we're seeing a far right-wing billionaire-backed think tank called the Cicero Institute partner or ally itself with the Trump administration to pass their racist, backwards, and frankly, ineffective solutions to homelessness that focus on jails and arrests and forcing people off of the streets. And we're seeing these right-wing billionaires peddle their lies both at the federal level, but also at the city and state level. So we are conscious of the fact that there is a well-funded billionaire-backed push to make it a crime to be homeless happening in cities and states and in Washington, D.C. and across the country. And we're working to use every lever in our toolbox to fight back and say the solution to homelessness has and never will be arresting people or fining people for being poor. The solution to homelessness has and remains getting folks the housing and support they need.
So, on paper, in theory, a lot of city mayors may agree with you and they may say that's exactly what we want. I'm in Los Angeles, which has a very serious crisis around housing and homelessness and has had progressive mayors, or people have called themselves progressive. And yet when they get into power, they will do things like homeless sweeps, or they will organize housing, but then push people into it and say that they're actually creating housing. How do you tell apart an agenda that looks good on paper from the way in which it actually plays out?
I think the proof is in the pudding, right? We know the solution to homelessness is housing and supports. At the same time, since at least the 80s, the federal government has abandoned their responsibility to ensure that everyone has a safe place to live. So cities and states across the country are left carrying the water for decades of failed federal housing policy, which we know is only going to get worse during the Trump administration. But we do see bright spots. There are cities that are investing in housing, in supportive services, and in those cities, homelessness is going down. What I think is important is to name that making it a crime to be homeless is one of the last bipartisan areas of agreement in this country. We see people from Mayor Mamdani in New York reinstituting homeless sweeps. We see Governor Newsom making it a crime to be homeless in a way that isn't substantively different from the Trump administration. But here's the truth. More than half of people in this country struggle to pay rent. There is a growing acknowledgement that our housing system is rigged for the billionaires and is not working for everyday Americans. And that is true in big cities, in small towns, in the coasts, in the heartland. We have a housing crisis in this country, and we need our elected officials at every level of government to do their jobs and make sure that everybody has a safe place to live and stop taking these lazy, dishonest, backwards approaches like making it a crime to be homeless because we know that will never work. In fact, that will only make homelessness worse. If a mayor, if a governor, if a senator, if the president is actually interested in solving homelessness, they'll do they'll do the hard work of governing and ensure that everybody has the resources, including housing and healthcare, that they need to thrive.
It seems as though we need to look at the causes of homelessness first and foremost, right? Because if you're looking for solutions that actually prevent the problem in the first place, then you need to know how the problem was caused as opposed to putting band-aids on the end that may or may not work. Or I suppose it's a both-and approach where you do address the fact that people are currently on the streets, but then how do you also create conditions where people don't end up there in the first place? Do you address the most, and you've alluded to it already, this very serious issue of the fact that people simply can't make enough money to pay housing that's simply too expensive. It's an equation that just doesn't work for far too many Americans, right?
Right. The math is not mathing. People cannot afford rent in this country, and the number of people who are housing insecure keeps the number of people who are housing insecure keeps going up. The federal government is finding money to demolish the parts of the White House. They're finding money to fund ICE detention facilities at the same time saying they have to cut funding for housing. But we know the truth. We have enough resources in this country for everybody to have their needs met, but that requires the billionaires and those people in power paying their fair share. We know by and large, the overwhelming cause of homelessness is the fact that rents are too high. Every time rents go up $100, homelessness increases by 9%. People should think back. How many times in the past decade has the rent gone up $100? That is why more people are sleeping outside and have nowhere else to live. And you're right, we will never stop homelessness. We will never solve homelessness until we address the underlying factors, the number one of which is that the rent is just too damn high. But at the same time, we also need to be aware that over 700,000 people sleep outside or sleep without housing each night in the richest country in the world. So we need to do the work of both transforming our housing system and connecting the people currently experiencing homelessness with housing and supports that they need to get off the streets, to stay healthy, and to get reconnected with stability. And I saw this every day when I was a street outreach worker doing work at homeless encampments in Washington, D.C. When people got connected to housing, they didn't live outside anymore. They were able to maintain their medical appointments. They could reconnect with their family. They could find jobs or volunteer activities. And they weren't homeless anymore. We know that housing solves homelessness. There's just not nearly enough to go around.
Tell me the organization's history, when it was founded, how and why the National Homelessness Law Center was founded.
We just, I believe, celebrated our 36th year, and we've been, over the past 3.5 decades, fighting for the rights of people experiencing homelessness, since the 80s, we have certainly seen an uptick in homelessness caused primarily by the federal government's abandonment of ensuring that people have the housing that they need. So we have used tools in our toolbox from litigation, policy, advocacy, organizing, all of these tools to both fight fiercely for the rights of people experiencing homelessness, while also trying to create the political will and political momentum to finally reach a day in this country where nobody is sleeping outside in America. It is shameful that in the wealthiest country in the world, hundreds of thousands of people go to bed each night without a safe place to live. But we know it doesn't have to be like that. We have seen time and time again that when folks get housing and support, they don't experience homelessness anymore. We need our politicians to summon their political will and political courage to do their jobs and make sure that homelessness is a thing of the past.
So, when you look at solving this big issue, what you laid out earlier was a pretty straightforward answer, right? It's not rocket science to actually fix the problem. Yet, the obvious solutions don't seem to get adopted. Is there anywhere where the solutions that the National Homelessness Law Center is suggesting have actually been properly implemented and are working? Or is this a problem that can only be fixed holistically because inequality is effectively a national issue? And also, why aren't these direct, obvious, elegant solutions being implemented? Sorry, those are like three big questions in one, but take your time.
I'll start with the last question, and I think it's because we have, and by we, I mean people in power, billionaires and politicians, have fundamentally misdiagnosed the cause of homelessness. There is a mistaken but pervasive belief that homelessness is a choice, that people are choosing to sleep outside, and that if we make it a crime to be homeless and make homelessness harder, people will choose something else. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nobody is choosing to sleep outside. People are sleeping outside because they have no other options. But it's going to take building political momentum and political power to ensure that our politicians respond to the facts on the ground, which are that housing is too damn expensive, healthcare is too damn expensive, food and eggs and gas are all too damn expensive, and that to address these things, we need to build an economy and a society that works for everybody, not just Donald Trump and Elon Musk and these billionaires. But that's hard. And it's easier for politicians to take the easy way out and say, we're just going to make it a crime to be homeless in our city, our state, or our country. But we know that hiding the problem doesn't solve the problem. Just like you wouldn't want your kids to sweep all of their crumbs under the rug, we don't want to hide homelessness. We want to actually solve homelessness and ensure that everybody has a safe place to live. But that's hard, and it's going to take the federal government to do their part. And right now, we know that the Trump administration is not only not funding the housing and support we need, but actually trying to gut the very programs that have solved homelessness for hundreds of thousands of people over the past several decades. At the same time, the Trump administration is moving to make it a crime to be homeless. We are seeing states like Utah propose the creation of massive 1,300 bed homeless detention centers for people to be forced into. That should ring alarm bells in everyone's mind. We have done that as a country before, and we have seen these large detention camps around the world before, and they're shameful and they don't work. But consistent with the Trump administration's policies of bringing us backwards, they want to bring us back to a time where if you were poor or homeless or different, you could be sent to a government-run detention camp. And we need to collectively say the solution to homelessness is housing. It is not and will never be detention camps or handcuffs. And to your point about who's doing this well, there are certainly cities and states across the country that are making marked progress. But the truth remains, the federal government needs to step up. We know that cities and states across the country are struggling with increases in rent that are leading to increases in homelessness. And in order to see national progress, we need our elected officials on the national level, Congress, the Senate, the White House, to do their jobs and prioritize basic needs like housing and healthcare over things like war and deporting our migrant neighbors.
That's a really good segue into my next question, which is narrative strategy, because, so many folks, even folks who are progressive, I mean, you were pointing out Mayor Mamdani in New York, who is, the most prominent progressive politician today, perhaps. And yet there are folks who, will say money for housing and not for war, and then complain about the fact that when they step out of their apartment building, there is somebody who's camping out on the sidewalk, and they will want their city to disappear that problem. And so how do you, what's a narrative strategy that the National Homelessness Law Center adopts to tell that story in a way that pulls people in and doesn't, and discourages them from reaching for those knee-jerk solutions that don't actually work?
I could geek out about narrative strategy all day. I so appreciate this question. I think that it's really telling the story of us. This isn't just about people who are sleeping outside right now. This is about the millions of people who are a missed paycheck or a car repair away from getting evicted and having no choice but to sleep outside. Our housing system is fundamentally broken. And more people are seeing that every single day as their grandparents, as their parents, as their cousins, as their friends have nowhere else to live. Right now, the largest population experiencing an increase in homelessness is senior citizens. Senior homelessness is supposed to increase by upwards of 300% in the next several years. This is people like parents, grandparents sleeping outside because they can't afford the rent anymore. I think we can collectively agree that that's not okay. And then how are we driving to real solutions? Nobody thinks that throwing grandma in jail for being homeless or for sleeping outside is a good thing. But people think that homelessness is an intractable social issue. But the good news is that it's not. Homelessness is a byproduct of failed policy, but it's relatively new, right? This age of mass homelessness started in the 80s, which means that when my parents were growing up, there was not mass street homelessness. To me, that reminds me that there's some hope that homelessness didn't always exist in this country, which means it doesn't always need to exist. We can get back to a time when everyone has their basic needs met and where nobody was sleeping outside. But to do that is going to take building big, broad coalitions and really focusing on the fact that we are not safe as a society. We cannot be healthy as a society. We cannot be just as a society. Well, people have no choice but to sleep outside. I think there's also a really important part of this moment that we have to name, which is that Donald Trump is purposefully using homelessness as an entryway to enact an authoritarian agenda. We have seen this from the constant dehumanization of homeless people, from the push to treat homeless people as a political football, to use homelessness to stoke racist fears about safety, all the way up to Trump's desire, his explicit desire, to round homeless people up and force them into government-run detention camps. As people are becoming aware of the fact that the Trump administration is trying to use fears over migration to enact a power grab, so too must people realize that Donald Trump is using homelessness to enact a broad authoritarian agenda. But what starts with homeless people isn't going to stop there. They are coming for everybody who they believe is they're coming for everybody who this administration doesn't like, whether it's homeless folks, trans folks, migrants, poor folks, Black folks, Indigenous people, queer folks. It's all of our liberation is bound up together, and we need to do a better job naming the fact that homelessness is at the center of Donald Trump's plans for enacting a white supremacist regime in this country.
I so appreciate you making those connections. We're in this really bizarre situation right now where Trump is waging war and fomenting all of these attacks, and the ones that we hear the most are the ones around the attacks on DEI, which are of course coded attacks on people of color and the immigration raids, again, overt attacks on people of color. So I'm wondering if you can just take a quick digression, Jesse, to explain how the attacks on unhoused people are very much intersecting with our problematic criminal justice system and racial injustice. Those things are going hand in hand because the right-wing solution and frankly the centrist solution to homelessness is criminalization, which feeds into the prison industrial complex and policing and all of those things that go hand in hand with racial injustice, right? This is an issue centered also on race, right?
Absolutely. Let's be clear. Attacks on homeless people are attacks on Black and brown people, period. People of color, specifically Black people and Indigenous people, are dramatically overrepresented in homelessness. In Washington, D.C., where I'm based, over 9 out of 10 people experiencing homelessness in D.C. are Black, compared to about 45% of the general population. So we know that when Donald Trump chose to take over DC with military force, including using federal police to harass and using police to destroy homeless encampments, that was a racist attack on a city with a Black mayor that has a high Black population in which an extremely high percentage of people experiencing homelessness are Black. So attacks on homeless people are part of a white supremacist agenda. I think the Trump administration and the right-wing movement has shifted, right? Instead of saying they're attacking anti-racism, they say they're attacking DEI. Instead of saying they're attacking Black folks, they say they explicitly shift to attacking homeless folks, but they're still targeting the same people. And their solution is to further criminalize homelessness and to further entrench people's trauma, entrench people's sense of not belonging, to kind of create a two-tiered society. We're watching a bill right now in Louisiana that would basically say that if you are homeless and you commit any crime, you are subject to a different justice system than you are if you were to have committed that crime and you were housed. So we see this creation of a two-tiered justice system as very, very concerning. And it is the same thing we saw in the war on drugs. It is just not covert, but not perhaps as overt as could be ways to attack Black people in this country.
And then, Jesse, tell me also about the Housing Not Handcuffs campaign. I understand that part of it involves rallying around a bill that would actually address some of the solutions to the homelessness crisis.
Absolutely. So at the beginning, I mentioned an organization called the Cicero Institute, which is founded by Palantir billionaire Joe Lonsdale. In addition to Palantir playing a critical role in the Trump administration's deportation regime, the Cicero Institute is a proponent of making it a crime to be homeless, gutting funding for housing and support, and forcing homeless people into government-run detention camps. About 2 years ago, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called Johnson versus Grants Pass that cities can in fact arrest people for sleeping outside even when they have nowhere else to go. And since that ruling, over 300 cities have passed laws that make it a crime to be homeless. The Housing Not Handcuffs campaign and the Housing Not Handcuffs Act is a piece of legislation designed to restore those protections that the Supreme Court gutted, but we're not stopping there, right? We know that not arresting someone for sleeping outside is not even the floor of justice. It is the basement. We should not have to be having this fight, but we are. So we are committed to both fighting to restore these protections while also building the power we need to ensure that everybody across the country has a safe place to live.
And who are your natural allies in this fight? Where does the National Homelessness Law Center fit within the universe or the landscape of social justice organizations nationwide? I imagine that there's a lot of common ground that you share with organizations. I'm even thinking of, for example, rent strike groups that organize renters so that they don't end up being priced out of their housing and on the streets.
Absolutely. I mean, we are so grateful for our partnerships with national organizations, too many to list, but we're really excited to grow our relationships with mental health advocacy organizations, harm reductionists, criminal legal experts, things like that, but also to build out these networks and power in cities and states across the country. I will say that a place of growth for the progressive movement is to really focus more on and get comfortable talking about homelessness, especially as we look at the attacks on democracy and homelessness as a piece of Donald Trump's broader authoritarian agenda. We need the progressive movement to stand up with us and say the solution to homelessness is housing, not handcuffs, and fight as fiercely against these proposed homeless detention camps as people are valiantly doing to stop these ICE detention camps from getting built. So we are open to working with people who want to build the power we need for an economy that works for everyone. And we recognize that an economy doesn't work for everyone if people have no choice but to live outside.
And then how can individuals support the work that you're doing? How can people get involved? I know, some groups are membership organizations, others are mostly coalitions. Is there a way for individuals to plug in if they really like what they're hearing and want to support your work?
Absolutely. People should check out housingnothandcuffs.org. There are ways to support all of our work, including taking action for the Housing Not Handcuffs Act, which we just spoke about. We also have a campaign called No Federal Funds for Homeless Detention Camps. We know the Trump administration is actively considering using federal money to fund things that make it a crime to be homeless, and that might include forcing homeless people into detention camps. So we need help saying no detention camps, not anywhere, not for anybody. And then we are happy to connect with folks in cities and states all across the country who want to bring the message of housing, not handcuffs, to their community.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Give out that website one more time, and also the website for the organization itself.
Housingnothandcuffs.org, and folks should check out our website at homelesslaw.org.
And we'll link to those from our website. Thank you so much, Jesse, for joining us, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
My guest has been JesseRabinowitz, Campaign and Communications Director at the National Homelessness Law Center, and this is Rising Up for Justice. I'm SonaliKolhatkar, host and executive producer of this new weekly half-hour series, exclusive to viewers of Free Speech TV and subscribers of my long-standing program, Rising Up with Sonali. You can find out more at risingupwithsonali.com.